Welcome to Passport to Everywhere with Indagare's Melissa Biggs-Bradley.
Melissa is the founder and CEO of Indagare, a travel and media company committed to inspiring and empowering people to change their lives and the world through travel, while having a positive impact on the places they visit. On the show, Melissa will transport you to dream destinations, share the latest travel news and trends, and introduce you to the most extraordinary people she has met on the road.
Geography, in my view, should not define destiny and should not be an impediment to opportunity. I think anybody, any girl, anywhere in the world, wherever she's born, should have the same opportunities to live happy lives.
Follow her behind the scenes to the world's most legendary hotels and join us as she explores the future of travel.
Princess Mabel van Oranje of the Netherlands is a devoted human rights activist whose passionate efforts have pushed the boundaries of gender equality. Her journey into activism began at the end of her studies when she interned at the United Nations in New York. But it was her role as the first CEO of the Elders, a dedicated group of global leaders brought together by Nelson Mandela, that really launched her into the forefront of the fight against gender discrimination. Through the Elders, Mabel helped confront the pressing issue of child marriage and became a committed advocate for girls' rights. To provide some context, child marriage is a widespread dilemma that affects girls under the age of 18 who are involved in any marriage or informal union lacking love or choice. UNICEF reports that 720 million women worldwide today were married as children, which equates to 12 million girls every year, or 1 every 3 seconds. In 2018, Mabel founded VOW for Girls, a nonprofit organization committed to ending child marriage by empowering local communities and providing resources to underprivileged girls. Since its creation, VOW has backed more than 175 community-led organizations, directly benefiting 260,000 girls and indirectly impacting 1.6 million people across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. As VOW expands its reach to 9 new countries this year, Mabel continues to inspire all of us to believe in the power of collective action and the possibility of creating a future where every girl has a say. I'm thrilled to dive into how partnering with locals is the key to success and to learn more about how we can all take steps towards creating a better future for generations to come.
Join Melissa on the journey. You're listening to Passport to Everywhere. Here's your host, Melissa Biggs-Bradley.
Let's start at the beginning. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your childhood and growing up in the Netherlands.
So I grew up in an average Dutch family, and I would think a very normal childhood, except that I lost my father when I was quite young. He passed away completely unexpectedly when I was 9 years old. And that obviously had a huge impact in my life, in that it made me realize that life can be short and that it is something quite precious. I also, because of the work he did this was in the early 70s, he worked for Philips and used for his work to travel quite a bit to Latin America. And he would come back with these stories about the poverty that he saw there. And it made me realize at a young age that the things that I took for granted, like going to school, like, having access to health facilities, that those were things that I found completely normal, but that they are not normal in other places in the world. And unfortunately, still today in 2024, that's not the case. And I guess that created in me a sense of justice and injustice, and a feeling like, why shouldn't the same opportunities be available to anybody, any child, anywhere, regardless of where you're born? And I mean, we'll be talking about the child marriage issue, but that's a theme that keeps coming back in my life.
Yeah. And so that was obviously at a young age, you had an awareness of the greater part of the world. When did you first travel, Mabel? When were you first actually witnessing some of these things yourself?
I remember my first travel, by plane. That was when I was 9 years old. After my father's death, my mother took me and my sister to Scotland to take us away from everything. But my first faraway travel was later in life, and seeing some of these injustices with my own eyes was much later. I did actually quite a few internships during my studies. I studied economics and I studied political science at the University of Amsterdam. And I realized that doing summer internships with companies or with organizations was a great way not just to learn more about what I might do with my professional life, but also to become part of a culture and not just look at it as a tourist, but actually become ingrained with colleagues, etc. So I did an internship in Mexico, I did one in Barcelona, I did one in Malaysia, and I did one in New York at the United Nations, and I found it fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember being in Malaysia and, I had Malay colleagues and Chinese colleagues and Indian colleagues, and they would invite me to their weddings and to their anniversaries and to all kind of, celebratory moments. And it made me realize how diverse we are as humankind, and yet how much we have in common.
Yeah. And in some ways, do you think growing up in the Netherlands, that is a country that has also always had lots of, relationships with many other cultures and countries. It's very diverse in many ways.
The Netherlands is obviously a very small country, and we speak a language that almost nobody speaks. So it's a country that historically has been very dependent on trade, on international relations, on its population learning diverse languages. So I speak English, I speak a bit of French, I speak a bit of Spanish, and I guess it definitely helped me to have an open mind. It's also a country that is very prosperous, even though of course we have parts of the population that are much less well off than other parts of the population. But overall, it's a country where there's a big sense of justice and of social care, which is something that I again believe strongly in. Why should somebody who's born in the Netherlands have certain rights, and people who happen to be born elsewhere shouldn't?
Yeah. And obviously I want to get to VOW and some of the activism that you've really championed in so many different ways. But of course, everyone, you're a princess, and everyone is curious. So what's surprising about that? How has that changed your life?
Well, so after I finished my studies, I finished my studies doing an internship at the United Nations in New York, and this was in 1993, and that was the time of the Bosnian War. There was a horrendous war going on, and whenever I could, I would go to the debates at the Security Council and listen to how the Bosnian Muslims were denied the right to self-defense, to buy arms, how the safe areas were created. But then we know that some of these safe areas, like Srebrenica, were run over later on. The War Crimes Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia was created. And it created in me a sense of, again, that feeling of this is wrong came up. And so I felt this is something I want to do something about. And I met then a lot of activists who were trying to get the American government to do more to end the horrors in Bosnia. And I figured we need something similar in Europe. So long story short, that's when I set up my first non-governmental organization, which was a group trying to influence West European policy on the Balkans. That's how I then basically my career took a change into working on human rights and development issues, first on the Balkan issues, then with the Open Society Foundations on a much wider range of issues. And while I was working as an activist, as a kind of an advocacy person trying to change policies, build donor partnerships, I met my husband, and he became my husband later on, and we fell in love. And so, in a way, just like any nice, beautiful love story, this was one of where two hearts and minds met and decided we want to continue life together. And we dated for about 4 years before we ended up getting married. And I was at that time living in Brussels. My husband was living in London, so I moved to London and continued my work from there. And in a way, my biggest worry marrying into the Dutch royal family was, can I continue to do the work that I personally feel so passionate about? And luckily, my husband was very clear about it. He said, "Look, part of who I fell in love with is this activist, this woman who cares so much about these issues. So one way or another, we'll make sure that you can continue doing what you feel passionate about.
Well, that's fantastic. So I want to talk about today really your work with VOW for Girls, because that is the thing. I mean, you've been involved in so many different programs, but I'm really interested in how you first got involved in the work specifically supporting girls and women. And I don't know, I read a little bit about the Elders, which I know you were involved with, which was Jimmy Carter and Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu's program. But can you share how this all started and when the seed was planted for VOW for Girls?
So I got truly engaged in issues, gender-related issues related to girls and women, when I was the first CEO of an organization called the Elders. That's a group of 12 wise men and women, all semi-retired, who had been brought together by Nelson Mandela. And these are former presidents like Jimmy Carter, used to be an active elder, former Secretary Generals of the United Nations like Ban Ki-moon and Kofi Annan, former luminaries like Lakhdar Brahimi, Archbishop Desmond Tutu was the chair, and so he was de facto my boss. But also Mary Robinson is in the group, Graça Machel's in the group. It was in a way the all-star soccer team of people who are trying to create a better world, basically. And they had decided, and this was in the year 2009, that they wanted to work on the issue of gender inequality. They felt that that's one of the biggest injustices in the world today. And they wanted to look at it, and this was President Jimmy Carter who proposed this, through the lens of how religion and tradition, that are normally forces for good in our lives, too often get misused in order to justify discrimination against girls and women. And so they spoke out about this, and that got a lot of traction. And we figured, whoa, let's see what more we can do. And so we started looking at how in our daily lives does this happen. And we found out that religion and tradition often can be a driver behind child marriage. And so we stumbled across the issue of child marriage in a way. And I had by that time already done about 15 years of human rights and development work, and I had rarely heard about the issue of child marriage. And of course, the two words say it all: child and marriage. And this is not okay. But what I hadn't realized, and I considered myself a fairly well-informed person, is that this is happening to 12 million girls every year. Now, that's a girl every 3 seconds. Think about that. That means that, 1 out of every 5 women who is alive nowadays was married off as a child. And not only is this an enormous problem, but this is also something that is having a very bad effect on development issues, because these girls normally get pulled out of school, they become pregnant before their bodies are really ready to become pregnant. They're much more likely to become the victims of of domestic abuse, sexual abuse, gender-based violence. And so we realized this is not only in numbers a big problem, but this is also a true impediment to poverty eradication and to justice, basically. And so that's where the elders then first said, okay, let's try to change that. So they did a lot of work to help to put the issue on the global agenda, so that now if you go to these big development weeks at the United Nations every year, people who talk about education also talk about how if you don't have schools for teenage girls, the chances that they will get married are much higher. People who work on family planning talk about how you obviously don't want 14-year-old girls who happen to be child brides to become mothers at that age, etc. And so we realized we need to change this. And we've also realized if you want to change this, needs to happen locally. This is not a problem where you say, okay, here is a magic pill and swallow the pill and everything will be fine. No, you need to look at in a particular community. And this is happening all over the world, by the way.
I was just in Egypt and I learned that it is still legal in the South to marry. In fact, you have the first right of refusal if your cousin's going to get married, and it starts very young.
It is a truly global issue happening across continents, across cultures, across countries, across religions. And the worst places are South Asia, where the numbers are enormous, and Sub-Saharan Africa. But Latin America, 1 out of every 4 kids, and these are holiday destinations. And 1 out of every 4 girls in Latin America is in some kind of marriage or in what they call union before she's 18. Like you said, you were in Egypt on a holiday. What we realized also is you can't solve a problem like this unless it becomes considered a true problem and addressed at a global level, and you get more money to go to the issue. But at the same time, change in the end happens locally. Because if you have a village in Bihar in India where it's happening, it might be because there's no secondary schooling available. If you go then to, let's say, northern Ethiopia, it might be because of tradition. People do it because they do generation after generation. They don't know any better. If you look at the Syrian refugees, Syria before the war didn't have a high child marriage rate. Nowadays, because of poverty and because of concerns about the sexual safety of the girls, the parents feel obliged to marry their daughters off at a younger age. We see that climate change is having an impact because of insecurities, parents marrying their daughters off. Now, so the reasons why it happens are different in different places, yet it is always related to the matter of gender inequality. Does the fact that a girl is considered less than a boy, and that therefore, if hard choices have to be made, it's the girl who you get rid of, not the boy. Or it's the girl who you pull out of school, not the boy. Now, of course, that's wrong. And that's not only wrong, that is economically stupid as well, because every girl who we can keep in school increases, the money she'll earn over her life. And we know that girls and women put money that they earn back into their families, so they help to lift their families out of poverty. This means that if you want to tackle child marriage, you need to get money to communities, because in the lives of the girls, their families and their communities is where the change happens. And that can't be done up down. I mean, me living in London, I don't know what is best, how you create change in a village in Bihar or in a community in the Dominican Republic or in Uganda. And so what we realize is at the same time, there are very interesting organizations, small, that are working in those countries all over the world that want to create change. But often they need a little bit of money in order to make that change happen. And they are, so there is a need. And when I also found out, there's a lot of people, when even people hopefully now, when they hear me talk, they say, oh, this is terrible. I would like to help to create a change for these girls. But they don't know how to get the money to those locations where it matters most. So I figured, okay, let's try to bring demand and supply together. And that all started really happening when about 7 or 8 years ago, I went to a wedding of friends. And these friends very kindly said, look, we would love all our guests, rather than to give us yet another bread toaster or chinaware, we would love our friends to donate to this good cause. And this is where the light bulb happened. And I figured, wait, what if we can make sure that when people celebrate happy moments, they can at the same time turn it into fundraisers to make sure that girls elsewhere in the world can also live the lives they want to live, and choose love on their own terms.
Actually, Mabel, I can't believe it because my daughter and I, are celebrating our birthdays together because we're one day apart. And so this year she decided we should celebrate our birthday in London with women that we love. And we've invited friends from her best friends, some of my best friends, and we're doing a women's lunch and dinner in London. And now you've given me the perfect gift to give to all of these women. I have a t-shirt for them that says Matriarchy Now that I found from another friend in Bali as a nonprofit. And this is the most perfect thing. So you've solved my birthday
Fantastic.
present. I couldn't think of a better gift.
But this is so interesting, because there are lots of people. So the original idea around Vow for Girls is couples who are getting married asking their guests to donate to make sure that girls elsewhere in the world can also choose love on their own terms and live the lives they want to live. But then we realized, like, there are a lot of people who are celebrating 15 years of marriage or 25 years of marriage or bar mitzvahs, or the example you just gave, Melissa, of your daughter and you celebrating with the women in your life who you love most. And people who say, look, we actually, when we have these wonderful parties, let us do something meaningful as well for girls elsewhere in the world who are not as fortunate as we are. And there the whole issue of justice comes back again. And this idea of like geography, in my view, should not define destiny and should not be an impediment to opportunity. I think anybody, any girl, anywhere in the world, wherever she's born, should have the same opportunities to live happy lives.
Absolutely.
This is Passport to Everywhere. We'll be right back after the break.
You're listening to Passport to Everywhere, and I'm your host, Melissa Biggs Bradley. Today I'm speaking with human rights activist Princess Mabel of the Netherlands about her foundation, VOW for Girls, which is dedicated to protecting girls' rights and ending international child marriage. Be sure to stick around after our conversation to hear this week's Indagare Insight, where I continue the conversation about change and give you an inside look at our Indagare Impact program and share how eco-conscious tourism is at the forefront of the luxury travel industry.
Passport to Everywhere with Melissa Biggs Bradley continues. Listen to new episodes every Thursday on all podcast platforms.
If I'm understanding, Mabel, much of what your work is doing is identifying, you're obviously bringing supply and demand together with people who can fund this, but it's also identifying the organizations in all of these local communities that can actually be effective about bringing about change. Is that right?
And that's correct. So we created VOW for Girls as an organization that works with companies, that works with wedding professionals like party planners, photographers, people who rent out venues, who do hair, makeup, etc. And also then with couples and their guests and friends and family to mobilize funding. So we're working together with wedding dress designers. We're working together with some of the most famous planners in the world. We've had some very famous couples like Sheryl Sandberg and her husband Tom 2 years ago vowing their wedding, asking all their guests to give to VOW as well as donating themselves to VOW. We've now a growing number in the thousands of couples who come to us. Like, for example, the other day was a couple, Maggie and Jeremy. They came to VOW for Girls. They said, we want to do a fundraiser around our wedding. They raised more than $3,000. And all that money is making a difference because the money that VOW for Girls mobilizes, 100% of it goes to projects on the ground. And that work, the selection of those projects is done by our sister organization called the Girls First Fund. And the Girls First Fund was set up specifically to have the expertise to carefully select what are the projects that we think are going to make the biggest difference on the ground, vet them, make sure that these people that for example, applications can be done in local languages because you don't want to exclude meaningful work just because the people who are executing it don't speak English, and to keep a very close eye on that the money is indeed spent the way it should be spent, but also learning lessons of what is having the most impact and what are lessons that if something went very well and there was an unexpected consequence in one place, what does that mean for other places so that they learn from each other. And we're talking small amounts of money. I mean, we're talking the average grant size, I believe, is less than $25,000 a year. To keep a girl in school is only something like $47. So people might sometimes think, oh, this is such a big problem. There's so many countries, so many projects that need to be done. But every small amount of money raised is actually making a real difference. I've been doing this work since 2010, since the elders got engaged in this work. And I've traveled to many different places to see what's happening, Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia. And I've now been visiting since VOW for Girls was created a few years ago. I've now visited Nepal and the Dominican Republic to see what efforts are taking place there on the ground. And I've been in contact with other grantees. And I must say, it is amazing to see the change that happens with very small amounts of money. Girls who can now stay in school, teenage boys and girls who get education about sexuality. And so now not longer just learn that they shouldn't get pregnant, but actually learn how you get pregnant and how you can avoid getting pregnant. I've met parents who say, look, we thought that it was a good thing to marry our daughters off at a young age. And now we know that this is actually not a wise thing to do. We now have the opportunity to keep them in school. I've met girls who have become leaders in their communities, young girls who proudly tell me how they have gone to the parents of friends who were about to be married off. And they've helped to convince these parents that this was actually not a smart thing to do. And you see change happening. I look at all these projects and I realize this is amazing. If every $50, every $100 that we raise is having such a transformative effect in the life of girls, let's make sure that we spread the word about VOW and that we get many more people to mobilize funding, and that thereby a much bigger change happens.
It's amazing. And Mabel, you mentioned that there's sometimes it's something, an unexpected thing in one community that really has an impact that you can then bring to other communities. Can you give me can you think of an example of one of those things that was sort of not necessarily what you expected that turned out to be a real change maker?
So one of these unexpected moments was when I was recently in the Dominican Republic. And Dominican Republic, a prominent tourist destination, especially from people from the United States. And I guess most people don't realize that 1 out of every 3 girls is married off by the time she's 18. Now, one of the things that completely surprised me when I was there is that sexuality issues are an enormous taboo. And we know that even, talking about sex with our own children is not always easy. But it's a real taboo there. It's for a whole host of reasons. So one of the unintended, but I think quite positive consequences of the programs that are supported in the Dominican Republic is that these girls are getting sex education. And they now know not longer don't get pregnant, because that's what everybody, school parents tell them, but they now know how you get pregnant and how you can avoid getting pregnant. And I asked them, so what do your parents think about the fact that you go to these clubs where you learn about these issues? And these girls started giggling and they said, when we come home, our mothers want to know everything we learned about sexuality because it seems that we know more than they do. Now, how would have thought that in a country where obviously sex is such a taboo, it's the teenage kids that teach their parents or their mothers about issues of sexuality. And that might hopefully also then mean in that these mothers, can avoid to get pregnant. I found it a very touching story.
That's amazing. And you mentioned that you've traveled to many of the places where you're working, both for the elders and for VOW. I would imagine that you yourself still learn things about the world that you wouldn't have expected as you travel. How does it continue to impact your perspective, the trips that you make?
If we talk about travel and learning experiences, I should definitely share an encounter that happened early on in my work on ending child marriages. And this was one of the first learning trips I did, and we went to northern Ethiopia, where first of all, I thought that child marriage was originally, I thought that it might be something that mainly happens in Islamic countries in the Middle East. And you see how prejudices can, how wrong one can be, because in a country like Ethiopia, the north, which is Orthodox Christian, actually has a child marriage rate of 80%. So 4 out of every 5 girls is married by 18, while the south, which is Islamic, has a rate of less than 1 out of every 5 girls being married by 18. So one of the things I learned, again, was a lesson in humility. Like, you have to look at the facts. Don't think that assumptions are not a good thing. But I was then in northern Ethiopia, and I sat down with a group of teenage girls who were already married. And I asked the girl next to me, how old when you got married? And she said, I don't really know, because I don't have a birth certificate. Because again, this issue of girls not being valued in many places, they don't get registered at birth. But this girl said, I think I was between 5 and 7 years old when I got married. And this hit me so hard, because my daughters at the time were 5 and 6 years old. And I realized that if they had been born there, they might have been child brides. And again, this issue of your geography, the place where you're born, should not define your destiny and the opportunities you have in life. That again came back to me, and it made me so determined to work on this issue of ending child marriage, because I truly believe, I mean, everybody who's listening to this podcast wants the best for their children, no? And I can't imagine anybody who listens to this podcast would think, oh yeah, great that my daughter would marry before the age of 18. So I think through VOW for Girls, we're now providing an opportunity for everybody who says, I want to help other girls by making sure that they can have those choices that I wish for my own daughters. We're making that possible now. And as I said earlier, every small donation is helping to make sure that girls can be girls and not brides.
Yeah. And have your girls traveled with you to any of these locations?
Yes, my girls have definitely traveled with me. Although of course there are limitations to the school holidays, etc. One of the trips I remember most vividly is when we went to Senegal, which is a country where there are thousands of villages that one village after another have decided that they're no longer marrying their daughters off. And so I wanted to learn about how they had done that. And so we went there, and the girls came with me, and it was fascinating to learn, because at some point, you in this work you hit a tipping point. There are so many communities that have said at some point, we're no longer engaging in child marriage, that the ones that still want to do it, there are just no brides available anymore. So you get to this thing of course, in our community, girls are married by the age of 15, to, of course, by the age of 15, our girls are still in school. And it's just fantastic to see, getting to that tipping point. And it was also fun, to go to these places with my daughters, and you see the communities doing, small theater plays about how they had tried to do role plays, acting out why child marriage is a bad thing. And so then, language doesn't matter anymore, because the images all make it clear. And of course, a lot of the toys that my kids didn't want to play with anymore are now hopefully still entertaining kids in villages in Senegal.
That's amazing. So are there things, Mabel, that you would like to impart in terms of, I'd love to know the best way for people to donate, to get involved in VOW. What's the easiest way for them to learn more?
So obviously, my view is that we can all make a difference. Nobody can do it alone. And what I would love to do here is encourage everybody who wants to give girls anywhere in the world an opportunity to join VOW for Girls. And VOW for Girls, our main task is to make that as easy as possible. So on the website vowforgirls.org, when you can find ways to engage. You can, if you're planning a wedding or in other festivities, you can get access to how to easily set up your own fundraising page. The VOW team can also help with that. If you know wedding planners or other wedding professionals who want to get engaged, we have a specific community called VOW Pro for them. Companies that want to get engaged, we would say reach out, and we can discuss how we might do, issues related to products or special events again. But the whole idea behind VOW for Girls is that we're making this as easy as possible for anybody who wants to engage, and we welcome any and all ideas. And obviously, we warmly welcome all the money that gets raised. And we will then make sure, with our help of the Girls First Fund, our sister organization, make sure that that money makes a real difference. 100% of all funding raised will go to projects on the ground.
That's fantastic. And I'm curious, Mabel, as someone who's traveled as much as you have, but really with the eyes of an activist, and you mentioned it, I love the example you gave about learning humility in Ethiopia, and sort of understanding that the perceptions that we sometimes go into a country with are wrong, which is why, I always think the most important thing to travel with is a lot of questions and an open mind. But as an activist, what are some of the ways that you get to understand a new destination, get to understand its people and its problems? Are there certain sources or when you mentioned bringing old toys to Senegal with your daughters, are there certain things that you found over the years that have helped you either understand a place, get to know a place, or feel that you're traveling in a way that is most rewarding to you?
When I go to a place where I haven't been yet, I always try to read about its history. Um, I try to find out if I have friends of friends who live there, who are, people from that country, to kind of hear their stories. Um, Obviously, because of the work I do, I always try to meet organizations that are working on gender equality, on ending child marriage, on keeping girls in school. But and I try to be very careful actually about bringing things. I mean, we shouldn't think that as that especially people who are relatively uh wealthy, that people in faraway places would want our old clothes or something. So I think we need to have humility there as well. And I do believe in the end, the biggest difference is providing financial support to local organizations. They will know what is needed to make a difference. But I think the most important thing is when you travel, bring your open mind and be open to try to understand what is happening in a country, what's happening in communities, and be respectful. People do in many places do things differently. Also, not just in faraway places, also on the other side of the town I live in, or even on the other side of the street. But people being different doesn't necessarily mean that it is better or worse. It just means it's different. And I think we can only learn and become better humans if we open ourselves up to different experiences, different thoughts. And that's what makes life enriching, I think.
I completely agree. And if you had to sort of summarize what you think the greatest gift of being able to travel has been for you, what would you say that is?
I travel for work. And when I travel for work, the biggest gift is to be better equipped to talk about the change that I'm trying to help to create, but also to learn and to see the differences we're making. So I don't think it would be helpful if I travel for work all the time. I think that would be a waste of resources. But I also want to travel sufficiently that I actually can be a good advocate for the cause I stand for. When I travel for pleasure, I that's actually not too often, but when I travel for pleasure, then often what I want is nowadays just a little bit of a break and then nice family time. So often that means bringing board games, card games, books, tennis rackets, and just having precious time with family and friends, which I think one can never have enough of in life.
Totally agree. Well, Mabel, thank you so much. This has been a real treat, and I'm so excited about what you're doing and sharing your message and your impact with more people, because it really is incredible what you're up to.
Thank you so much for creating a platform to get the message out. I much appreciate it, and I really hope that your audience will enjoy our conversation as much as I've enjoyed having it with you, Melissa. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
An enormous thanks to Princess Mabel for joining me today to talk about her inspirational work making a difference in so many lives. For more on VOW for Girls and to take part in igniting change, visit vowforgirls.org, where you can donate, create a fundraising page, or speak to the VOW team about getting involved. To put your donation into perspective, just $47 can pay the enrollment fees for a girl to attend school for 1 year. You can also follow the organization on Instagram at VOW for Girls and Mabel on Twitter at Mabel van Oranje, which is MabelVanorange. And if you're wanting to hear more from Mabel speak on child marriage, check out her TED Talk, The Impossible is Possible. Now it's time for this week's Indagare Insight, where we dive into sustainable travel and how we're making a difference right here at Indagare.
Here are this week's Indagare Insights.
I hope my conversation with Mabel and her work with VOW for Girls gave a powerful glimpse into the importance of promoting change around the world. And in the same spirit, for today's Indagare Insight, I'm thrilled to uncover our impact program here at Indagare. and talk about how sustainability and conscious tourism are at the forefront of the luxury travel industry. You may think that luxury travelers don't prioritize their impact as much as they could, as often luxury is associated with indulgence and opulence. But in fact, that is quite the contrary. At Indagare, we've seen firsthand how luxury travelers play a significant role in protecting the planet. That's why we're continually expanding our impact projects, actively engaging our members and partners to join forces in building a better future together. Like Mabel, we care deeply about protecting the people, especially the children, who live in the destinations that our members visit. We have a rigorous set of policies that guide the production of the itineraries we plan. They're developed in coordination with experts such as social workers specializing in early childhood emotional development, as well as conservationists and other experts in their fields. These policies help us select only the most responsible experiences to promote and guide fundraising to the organizations who can make the most effective use of it. Moreover, as we continue to pave the way, our impact projects focus on sourcing eco-friendly hotels, eliminating our carbon footprint, providing impactful content, creating itineraries with sustainability top of mind, and developing partnerships to create environmentally and socially conscious travel experiences, both on a personal level and through our small group trips. With that said, we're honored to partner with five-star hotels who lead the charge in environmental activism. Through our Impact Hotel program, we showcase a hand-vetted collection of top properties by awarding badges to selected hotels who best exemplify a strong commitment to sustainable travel. This carefully curated collection helps guide our members in making informed travel decisions based on what's important to their experience. If you're an Indagare member, you can see which hotels are recognized for their sustainability initiatives by looking for the Indagare Impact icon shown on the hotel's dedicated website page on indagare.com. The chosen properties are located in diverse areas all around the world. Some of our favorites include Necker Island in the British Virgin Islands and Phumbai Thong in Cambodia, along with Sagara Retreat in Kenya and Fogo Island Inn in Canada, who we've featured on Passport to Everywhere in the past. So be sure to check out our episodes with Jokan Zeitz and Zita Cobb to dive deeper into these special properties and how they're spearheading responsible tourism. Our hotel selection criteria is guided by the Global Sustainability Tourism Council and evaluated against our own Indagare Impact pillars. These pillars are centered around environmental conservation, the preservation of cultural heritage, and community development. We focus these pillars on a hyper-local scale, aiming to maximize our impact per dollar by working with organizations on small-scale issues that in turn have larger ripple effects. Through this approach, we're able to target the underlying cause of these problems rather than finding quick or temporary fixes. Last year, we contributed up to 2% of our annual revenue to support these pillars, leading to the exciting achievement of officially becoming 100% carbon neutral. We accomplished this by calculating the carbon footprint of every trip and offsetting it through our partners. While there's no such thing as emission-free travel, carbon offsetting allows us to compensate for the emissions we create by reducing the emissions elsewhere. Our partnership through Sustainable Travel International allows us to support certified projects. Content is also an important aspect of our impact program as we continue to build awareness through the power of written and visual storytelling. Just recently, our team returned from Zimbabwe to capture the dedicated work of the fearless men and women who constitute the Long Shield Lion Guardians, a conservation organization committed to building a future where humans and lions can live in harmony. They are actually our first primary impact partner, and through our impact fund, we fully fund the project that assists nearly 1,000 households and protects 10 prides of lions. Directly involving our members is another way we aim to make a difference. As an Indagare member, a portion of your annual membership fee directly contributes to the Indagare Impact Fund and our carbon neutrality efforts. With our help planning your travel, you can choose from our philanthropic-focused destinations that are impact-driven, where we partner with dozens of regional not-for-profit organizations to highlight the causes important to the places you are visiting. Or you can join one of our Indagare Insider Journeys, our small group trips to destinations that prioritize sustainable education and impact-focused activities tailored to the needs of the local communities. I hope today's insight offers a memorable look into our holistic contribution making travel more transformative. We're always on the lookout to expand our reach as leaders within the travel industry, and will continue supporting a more sustainable and environmentally conscious future for generations to come. If you want to learn more on our impact initiatives, visit indagare.com/mission. Thanks for joining another episode of Passport to Everywhere. Remember to sign up for our free weekly travel newsletter at indagare.com if you want to stay up to date on travel trends and on upcoming Passport to Everywhere guests. And if there's someone you would like to hear from on the show, or if you'd like to just share your feedback, please send me an email at passport@indagare.com. And don't forget to rate and review us on Apple and Spotify so we can inspire more passionate travelers like you. Thanks for joining the journey.
Thank you for joining us at Passport to Everywhere.
We hope you'll join the journey and subscribe. For more travel inspiration, visit indagare.com. INDAGARE. This has been Passport to Everywhere.